Welcome and welcome back, everybody, to the OK Grognard Show. Today is Thursday, June 17th, 2021, 10 a.m. Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And we are into our final part of spell explanations from the first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. This is part 8, and it should be the finale. We're getting into those illusion spells this time, and that's pretty much going to be all we need to deal with to finish up the spell explanations. 8 parts, that's a big section. It is by far the largest. I mean, it breaks down into 4 sections if you count each spellcasting class, but nevertheless, as a whole, spell explanations from the DMG are nearly 10 pages. I don't know, some of the appendices were fairly large or packed, but those are a lot of lists and stuff. There's not a lot to chew on in those, so it tends not to be as problematic as far as the show goes. I mean, you just got to list a bunch of things. You're just reading them off. Maybe you're adding a few insights here and there, but for the most part, this illusion spells section is fairly small. I'm going to pop in here and quickly talk about first level spells, gaze reflection, and I should note I've got the list up from the player's handbook here as well, so that we can see there are a full 7 levels of spells to deal with, although the number of spells under each level is not as extensive as we'll see in the magic user section or in the cleric section. Close in the druids. I mean, you've got 12 in each of the first 3 levels and then only 8 in the next 3 levels up to 6, and then you really only have 6 7th level illusionist spells. But to look at the explanations for them. Gaze reflection. The creature that has its gaze reflected by this spell is entitled to a saving throw. So if you're nailing a Medusa or a Basilisk, Cockatrice, any of the creatures that have a gaze that you have to save against, or something ill happens to you, often turn to stone, you can use this to reflect that like you would with a mirror, but the creature does get a saving throw. Light. The spell can effectively blind an opponent, as noted in the commentary of the cleric spell of the same name. Useful for sure. Jumping down to the next page and continuing with 2nd level spells. 3 of the 12. Detect magic. And some of these will bounce back to earlier explanations in one of the other 3 classes. In this case, for commentary on the spell, see cleric spell of the same name, not the magic user spell. So there are some differences between the 2, and they want to note that it is more akin to the cleric spell rather than the magic user spell. It seems a little counterintuitive, since illusionist is a subclass of magic user. That might require a little more delving into at a future date. Perhaps we can do a whole show on detect magic. It doesn't have to be a full half hour, but there's a lot of things about detect magic. And while we're at it, read magic and write as spells. Those are spells that I fold into a magic user spellbook right from the start rather than just detect magic in an offensive, defensive, and sort of neutral spell. I like to throw all three of those in there because I just have a feeling that a magic user needs those three to be an effective magic user at all. Second level spells include Fog Cloud. A gust of wind will dissipate the cloud in a single round. Invisibility. Morning, Sarah. Morning, George. George disbelieves this section. Popping back over. I just want to do a quick look over here. Magic user spells. Number 22 of the first level spells is Read Magic. Write is number 30. And Detect Magic is number 6. There are a ton of those spells. I think all three of those need to be part of the book of the first level magic user, along with 3 random, although as the DMG suggests, 1 offensive spell, 1 defensive spell, and 1 neutral spell. I guess you could include light, although as we see from, it can be used offensively. But, if you're a human magic user, a light spell might be one of the first things you'd want to have. Visibility, see the section on invisibility for commentary. That also is one of those things in D&D that could use an entire discussion. So we'll set that aside as well. Oh yeah, tons of magic user spells, George, for sure. I mean, the idea is that an illusionist is meant to be a subclass, and later on, of course, in later editions of D&D, they describe each school of magic with its own subclass, a conjurer, an evoker, so on and so forth, an abjurer. But illusionist was one of the first to pop up as a kind of a specialist magic user. And it's not surprising. It's such a unique branch of magic that people that would specialize in it might be able to do some great things. Rope trick. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's start at the top of the third level spells. Illusionary script. The cost of lead-based ink is 100 to 400 gold pieces, plus the alchemist profit of 100 gold pieces. Yeah, some people like running illusionists. I find them to be difficult at best for DMs, let alone players, to run in game because of the very difficult nature of playing to illusions when not metagaming, not hedging toward saving your character over role-playing how the illusion would affect the character in-game. Visibility 10-foot radius, see the invisibility section as above. Rope trick, see the magic user spell of the same name for commentary. Moving on to 4th level spells, improved invisibility. Improved invisibility has the effect of moving considerations for detection of such invisibility downwards by 2 places compared to other forms of invisibility. So tougher to tougher to detect, to see through. Phantasmal Killer. If the affected individual is somehow brought to an unconscious state, the spell cannot do harm. So there's one of those situations, right? If there is an illusionary being, a phantasmal killer, attempting to kill you, but you're unconscious, then you cannot believe in the illusion, and so it cannot harm you. How do you say, well, if I plug my ears and close my eyes and hold my nose, how can I even know that this thing is there? How can it kill me if I can't perceive it? Unconscious state, okay, that's pretty cut and dry, but what about if you're blinded or just closing your eyes in some way? Can you not avoid that potential downside? Tricky to adjudicate. 5th level spells. Shadow Door. The invisibly fleeing illusionist can be detected for invisibility, but there must be active and concentrated attempts to do so. This will not simply be noticed in passing, as attention will be on the shadow door. Shadow Magic. The caster is actually tapping a power source, even though the majority of the spell is illusion. Thus, the 1 hit point of damage per level of the caster. Okay, so that goes beyond just illusion, which seems also counterintuitive to the illusionist class. 6th level, Conjure Animals. Once again, Appendix L, Conjured Animals, refers to an appendix in the DMG. Demi-Shadow Magic. This spell also allows the caster to tap a source of power as noted under Shadow Magic. Astral Spell. See Appendix C, Random Monster Encounters, Astral and Ethereal Encounter Tables for a list of creatures which can be met when one is on the astral plane. Vision. Consider this spell similar to a Contact Other Planes for handling purposes. Unrelated visions should contain some cryptic clue as to what the caster is seeking. Even on a 10 or better, be certain to make the vision as unclear and indirect as possible. See, this is one of those divinations where the intent is to have the Dungeon Master be vague in some ways, to be mysterious. It's a tricky line to toe. I mean, if you think back on ancient myths, certainly anytime you consulted an oracle, there were prophecies of any kind. They could often be taken in multiple ways, sometimes even in opposite ways if one were to think about them a little more than just at face value. And so too with vision. The idea that it's meant to be unclear and indirect is a interesting way of saying give them something but don't give them the farm. So tricky to do, but sometimes, and don't be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid to take a few minutes to take a break from the table while you give some thought to how you're going to adjudicate any kind of divination, whether it's vision or one of the clerical divination spells, because it's important to not completely ruin the spell. After all, a lot of these are fairly high-level spells, and if somebody's going to invest in casting something that's fairly high level, it is fair for them to expect a fairly high level result from that casting. So to just undercut them and give them nothing but a few mumbled words or a riddle that is so difficult it might never be solved seems like a cheat, and it's not for the DM to nerf these things. I mean, if you're going to do that, just take them out of the game. If you're going to say divination is never going to work to the satisfaction of the caster, remove it from the game from the get-go. Take out augury, take out vision, take out any of these spells that are going to help a player figure something out almost in a metagame way, because it's unfair to dangle that in front of the players as something that will work by the book, and then once they get into a situation where they're relying on it to pull the carpet out from under them. So give that serious consideration. It says there's a final note here. Remember that the reverse of any spell must be separately memorized, and that each requires special components. So you cannot just memorize Cure Light Wounds and Cause Light Wounds and expect to be able to cast either in the moment. You are choosing one or the other, and then casting one or the other at that time from that. I think I mentioned before that in games I run, I allow a little more flexibility in that I will let casters pray or rememorize a spell at the cost of 10 minutes per level. So if you wanted to, if you had a second level spell that was doing you no good in the moment, you could take 20 minutes and memorize a different second level spell in its place. 30 minutes for a third level spell, 10 minutes for a first level spell. It takes time, so there are some potential consequences when it comes to wandering monsters or the water getting higher in a flooding situation, or there are things like that that can cause that time to be very costly. But it does allow for a little more flexibility, and it avoids the problem in some games where people will cast one or two of a dozen spells and then decide they're going to camp or go back to town, and these kind of mini forays, which people can do. I don't say that players are not allowed to do that sort of adventuring, but if they do that often enough, they're going to wind up losing a little something from the adventure as a whole. I think a lot of adventures are more fun for most of the players to push on and push through, to risk more by sticking with it than to, at the first loss of potentially replenishable resources, to turn back and to go hide in a hole. So, be that as it may, do as you will, DMs. Just a word of caution, I guess, on that. So that's really it for the spell explanations. I've discussed illusionist spells a number of times along the way, and I mentioned here again today that they're hard to adjudicate, so you have to make some decisions about those as a DM at the beginning of your campaign, how they're going to play out, what mechanisms players are going to be allowed to use to avoid illusionary magic. If, as in the case of our young selves, you could simply say, I disbelieve, and the DM would give you a saving throw. I've got to mention, though, in regard to that, that was something that we used to do in first edition games way back in the 70s and 80s as youngsters and late teens and early 20ers when the game was young. Well, that was something you could do to gain a saving throw. There were plenty of times when a player would say, oh no, Haldar, he disbelieves. This cannot be. This must be some sort of illusion. I disbelieve. All right, throw a saving throw. Even when it wasn't an illusion. And you might describe it as Haldar standing there. Well, if you disbelieve, your guard's down. You wouldn't have your shield up if you truly disbelieved. You wouldn't be taking a defensive posture if you really disbelieved. So there were some downsides when it wasn't illusionary magic. If that dragon is not an illusion and it's coming down to chomp on you, what's your armor class if you disbelieve? You're not defending yourself. Does that make an armor class 10? Are you still in metal armor and thus kind of crunchy? So maybe you have just what your armor class is, but no shield bonus, no whatever your armor actually is, but without maybe it includes magical pluses, but it doesn't include any dex bonus. Maybe by disbelieving, you don't get a saving throw against Dragon's Breath. If you don't believe the dragon is real, is the saving throw that you would normally make your effort against it, whether it's ducking behind something or putting up your shield or however you want to describe that, girding your loins against the dragon's breath. If you're disbelieving, are you just leaving yourself open to the full force of the dragon's breath, and thus you don't get a saving throw for half if that's normally what it would be for fire breath or lightning or acid? So, there are a few things to consider there too. Sarah says, I think I would ask them why they disbelieve, but the lesser defense is good too. Yeah, I think it's fair to do that for sure. I think if a player says their character disbelieves, I think it's fair to ask them for some explanation about why their character would disbelieve something, that could potentially kill them if they don't take some precautions. So, yeah, maybe that's a way. And if they don't say something convincing, then maybe they really don't get a saving throw because they aren't really disbelieving something, whether it's an illusion or whether it's a real thing. So, yeah, good point, Sarah, for sure. You could throw that in there and make that an even more interesting encounter by having the player explain why the character has some reason to disbelieve beyond, well, the DM would never throw this at us, it's too powerful. So, there you go. Well, I'm thinking we're pretty far along here, unless there's a question from the chat. I think we'll probably be winding it up. It was 8 weeks of spell explanations, from the DMG. I think there's a few other sections of the DMG I'd like to get into. I think also having introduced the idea of looking at some of the um, sub systems and whatnot that are developed and uh, added in on the Wilderness and Dungeoneers survival guides. I think there's a lot of meat in those that's worth looking through and adding into our regular weeklies. So we've got that coming up. I've got some more work to do with the Dungeon Master's kit. The Dungeon Master's Adventure Log on Monday. We'll be looking at that some more in future weeks. We'll be looking at the Wilderness Survival Guide, some of the sections in there. And then we'll also be taking some time to look at the Dungeon Master Survival Guide. Oh, I see. Well, ignore the fact that those look like junk because that's just a matter of being behind the screen instead of in front of it. So there you go. Anyway, today's dealio was Dungeon Master's Guide stuff. There are sections we'll get back to. Like I said, the idea of invisibility warrants a much deeper discussion. In-depth detect, read, and write magic for sure. Yep. We'll definitely do we'll do a section on those. We'll do an episode on those, and I think maybe we can fold that into a discussion of the starting spell books and how to handle spell books overall. There's a lot of schools of thought on that, on whether a wizard always has to have their spell books with them. Is there such a thing as a traveling spell book, a smaller version that you can carry around with you? If you're caught by dragonfire, is your spell book destroyed? Do you start from scratch? Does that ruin your day? For sure, it could. In any event, that'd be a good episode for those 3 spells to be included in. And I will just say, hey, thanks everybody. Thanks very much for joining me today. If you ever do come into the Twitch stream, just remember Monday and Thursday, 10 a.m. Central is when we do the stream on Twitch. Please do join us someday. And if you do, follow the channel and chime in on the chat while you're there because it's always fun. I enjoy the extra questions. I enjoy when people share their own experiences as well because it all adds to the discussion. I do want to say also, if you catch up with this on YouTube, please do subscribe to the channel. Click the little bell, which will get you updates to when new episodes are uploaded, which usually are within an hour of the stream. Feel free to give a thumbs up to any videos you watch and or enjoy. And feel free to leave comments if you have some constructive criticism about the show. If you want to join in the discussion of it, however you want to do that would be great. Thank you very much to everybody. This has been the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.